Genius. you get the feel of it, then we'll find my key. If it's a younger recording of her, if she sang it now, it'd be my key. Like a mother and child, like a light in the darkness, I'll hold you up. We'll rock on the wall. I'll cradle you deep and hold you while angels sing you to sleep. Like a ship in the
Cool. That's nice.
No chords, just lyrics.
Not yet. Other than ones for guitars.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Oh.
See what you come up with.
Yeah, here, let me write down the lyrics, and then I can at least figure out where to put them.
I'll probably hit some more. Like a ship in the harbor.
Some of the guys are a lot better now. They've got
Want to draw my page?
Oh, sure.
Maybe too small, because they're going to be on the screen too. But. Like a ship in the harbor. No, the chords are ship. No. Yeah.
Does it just stay there?
Just do it. No. There.
Oh, it just stays
It
there.
stays there.
Cool.
I can tell you when it's right. My ear can't tell you what it is. Like a mother and child.
So there we go. D flat.
Like a heart in the What was the first chord you had before? No, like the
Oh, it was.
opening bass note. No. Yes.
All right, darkness. Oh. So if we went to D, probably go to E. Is that it? so I think that just stays in E flat. So.
Like a ship in
No, I'm sorry. All right, cool.
we could start with Jesus Loves Me.
Yeah, I got that.
I used to do a thing with parallel sevenths with Jesus Loves Me. So it's just moving up, like
Yeah,
moving up. Yeah.
I'll have to look into that. How that would work.
Huh?
I'll have to figure out how that would work.
Well, it's kind of, it just doesn't do the whole thing, but
Yeah.
No, where am I? No. Can't do it that low.
Yeah.
And I can't reach.
Yeah.
I come over the other side.
Cool. Sounds very French. That's cool.
So I just do a little,
Yeah.
yeah. I was going to show you a picture of my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And just on YouTube,
Oh, cool.
there's a couple of her albums. So she's got a whole bunch of Christian contemporary songs
Oh, awesome.
that she'd done. She was a jazz singer, nightclub singer in Chicago and
Oh,
in LA
yeah?
for many years, and now she sings contemporary Christian music.
Oh, cool.
We've been working on an album of, this one's all jazz. Next step is all jazz. My Heart to Yours is contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
Then she's got a couple that are free downloads. And then we've been working on an album of all redone, reset traditional hymn tunes, public
Oh.
domain things.
Yeah?
So she has a jazz version of What a Friend We Have in Jesus.
Yeah?
It's a swing.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Cool.
All right. I show 7 minutes. So should we start with the...
Sure.
I mean, we can think. Shipping the Harbor's not going to last very long. But Jesus Loves Me. I'll get them to do some hand motions.
That's cool.
Let me get the microphones.
I'm sorry. I didn't know you were ready. I thought you were going to say something first.
Of singing that we know that we really know that no matter what anybody else says. Amen. I'm going to invite you to sing it and to do some sign language. So I'm going to put down my microphone so we can do some sign language with it. Yes, Jesus loves me. Right in the chorus.
Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
We're ready for some lyrics up here too. Like a ship in the harbor, like a mother and child, like a light in the darkness, I'll hold you a while. We'll rock on the water, I'll cradle you deep and hold you while angels sing you to sleep. Sing it again. Like a ship in the harbor, like a mother and child, like a light in the darkness, I'll hold you a while. We'll rock on the water, I'll cradle you deep and hold you while angels sing you to sleep. For how many of you, was that a song that gave you great comfort in the midst of the struggle? Yes, yes. Another song that gave a lot of people comfort and hope was a song that has story in itself. And the composer of that song happens to be here. So there's absolutely no reason that I should lead it. So Marcia Stevens?
I'm so hoping you can play it in the key of older lesbian. said you'd come and share all my sorrows. You said you'd be there for all my tomorrows. I came so close to sending you away, but just like you promised, you came there to stay. I just had to pray. And Jesus said, come to the water, stand by my side. I know you are thirsty, you won't be denied. I felt every teardrop when in anguish you cried, and I strove to remind you that for those tears I died. Your goodness so great I can't understand, and dear Lord, I know that all this was planned. I know you're here now and always will be. Your love loosed my chains, and in you I'm free. But Jesus, why me? And Jesus said, come to the water, stand by my side. I know you are thirsty, you won't be denied. I felt every teardrop when in anguish you cried, and I strove to remind you that for those tears I died. Jesus, I give you my heart and my soul. I know that without God I'd never be whole. Savior, you opened all the right doors, and I thank you and praise you from earth's humble shores. Most important line of the whole song, take me, I'm yours.
Come on, folks, now.
And Jesus said,
come to the water, stand by my side. I know you are thirsty, you won't be denied. I felt every teardrop when in anguish you cried, and I strove to remind you that for those tears I died. In the last several days, this guy's been sitting back here helping us sing. So would you give a round of applause and thanks to Curtis? So not only does he play, but he also sings. He's going to lead us into our next program.
I got one.
Oh, you got
already.
one. All right, I'll be two mics.
When I am down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burden be, when I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on the mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on the mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be.
Let's take a breath. Well, good evening. Welcome to this evening's panel. I'm Reverend Deborah Johnson from Santa Cruz, California. And it's a real special time that we're going to have here together for the next hour. When we were busy organizing and having various conference calls, I posed a question about, we're talking a lot about the movement, we're talking about a lot of things that are going on, but where are our stories in there? Where's our struggle? You know, we didn't just hatch here. You know, I was so terribly closeted that I can remember as a freshman in college, 16 years old, freshman at USC, I was so closeted when I first went there, I actually backed up against the table where the flyers were about where the gay group was meeting and knocked all the flyers down on the ground so I could pick one up without being noticed, but freaked out, ran away, and came back and stole one off a tree. And the group was meeting in the religious center. And my little Pentecostal heart didn't know what to do. We didn't hatch here. We all had our stories. And I'm going to invite some of my illustrious colleagues to come up. And the question that's being posed to each and every one of us, and I'll answer it as well, is what is the stone that we had to roll away? What was our own internal stone that we had to roll away in order to integrate? And I'm not saying reconcile, very deliberately, to integrate our sexuality and our spirituality. Okay? So we're each going to take about 6 minutes to do that. I'm going to bring them up in a moment, and we're going to be here. We'll see how we do on timing. And if there's enough timing, we'll open it up for some questions. But I want you to really feel into how deeply personal we're asking people to get, and how vulnerable it is. And I know for myself, it's been 45 years now since I've been an activist in the movement, and I had a girlfriend before that, that through the years I get kind of distanced from the pain of it, and I can tell it kind of, you know, like rote story, but it's really hard sometimes to drop into that vibration again. And that's what we're asking everybody to do, is not give the story as we are today, but to really go back and share, and hopefully that there's something in our struggles that might be an inspiration, and you might see yourself reflected in some of our stories. So without further ado, I'm going to invite my illustrious panel to come up. I will introduce them, and why don't we come on up? So Megan is going to be here on the end, and Chris will be next here, and Randall, you're going to be over here. I'm here. Judith, come here. Imani, you're on the end. So, once again, I want to thank you for your honesty and your willingness to have the rest of us bare soul, to bare your soul to the rest of us of the journey. So what's going to happen here, just so that we all know, because there's been different changes in the coordination, we're each going to speak for 6 minutes, and you'll get a lovingly little tap at the 4-minute mark, and that means start to wrap it up. And if you get a second tap, that means it's time, okay? So we're going to pass the tap down. I'm going to be the tap keeper. Pass it down. Okay, so I will be the first one to start. Let me get my little timer thing going on here. I don't know what we did before cell phones, I tell you. It really makes, I really wonder, like, what did we do? So I grew up very fundamentalist, evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal in the Holiness Church, the Church of God in Christ. So you got empathy for me already. My mother was president of the Women's Christian Council, and I was born gay. I mean, there was never a question, never a doubt. In fact, I was kind of relieved when I found out that's what it was, because I didn't have a name for it. I actually thought maybe I was trans till I was about 10 or 11 years old, because I just couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And I know that I struggled so much with the hell and the brimstone, and, you know, it's satanic and God hates you. And at that particular time, the American Psychiatric Association hadn't changed their minds, so we were sick and depraved. We still had the sodomy laws. You know, we were criminal. The church says we're satanic. You know, that's a lot for 10. You know, that's just a lot to wade through. And I had so much agony. I just did. It was like, God, you got to talk to me, because I don't. That's not what I think. And if that's what's really true, you got to talk to me. And when I went to college in 1972, there were 2 things that happened right at the same time. One, Troy Perry's, you know the book, The Lord is My Shepherd, and He Knows I'm Gay. I still haven't read that book. I finally got a copy from him a couple of years ago. You know, we've been colleagues for years, but just the title gave me so much hope, because in my heart, that's what I knew. I knew God didn't make no junk. And I really felt like God made me who I was. And just that title alone gave me this big sense of hope and starting to move that little stone away. That same year, Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon came out with Lesbian Woman. All I needed to know was that it was possible. Because up until then, there was nothing. There wasn't a Hallmark card, a love song, an image, a comic strip. Nothing. There was nothing, no evidence whatsoever that the life that I felt that I was destined to live was possible. And here were 2 women at that point in time who had been together for 20 years. It's on my mind. It's possible. That's all I needed to know. And then about 4 years later, about graduation time, this play came out. And do not confuse it with the Tyler Perry version of this movie. For color girls only, When the Rainbow is Enough, by Ntaki Shange. It's a beautiful story. There are 6 women in it. There are no props. And they're all in the same outfit. And at the end, they're loving up on each other. There's got to be a laying on of hands. And there was a line in there that shook me to my core. It said, I found God in myself, and I loved her fiercely. Oh, my God. That God could be inside of yourself, and that God could be like me. God wasn't just some big old white man in the sky, and that I could have a relationship with God, and God could like look like and feel like and be me. That's what I needed to roll away the stone. That's what I needed to confront my own internalized homophobia, to really see some possibility, and to know that I could find God on my own terms. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this. I had to drop the devil. I had to drop the devil. There could not be 2 gods. There could only be one God. There's not a God of evil and a God of good duking it out there trying to manipulate us. That's Roman Greco theology. And once I knew that I was okay with God, it was on. And I was just a little baby DAC activist ever since. So let me introduce this panel. I've modeled a little bit about what's going to happen here. So we're going to go every other person is how we're going to do this. And I'm going to introduce the panel starting from the end, now that I've kicked it off. On my far right is Dr. Imani Woody. She is the founding director and the CEO of Mary's House for Older Adults. She works fiercely in our community on issues of diversity and inclusion as a consultant as well. Next to her is Reverend Dr. Carter Hayward, who was ordained as an Anglican priest in 1974. She's a pioneer in the areas of feminist liberation theology and the theology of sexuality. To my right is Reverend Dr. Judith Ray. She's a biblical scholar, a teacher, homiletician, writer, and editor, as well as a carpenter. You don't want to see me with tools. She's a founding woman. She's a founding member of numerous affirming Christian organizations, really helping us get over it. On my, I guess I should say something about myself. So I'm the founder of Inner Light Ministries in Santa Cruz, California. We're just now celebrating our 20-year anniversary. I'm a movement strategist, organizational consultant, and diversity trainer with a lifetime of social activism. To my left is Dr. Randall Miller, who's the director of the Global Religious Program at the Arcist Foundation. He's a lifelong United Methodist layperson, and he's worked for the past 25 years in academic, philanthropic, religious, and social justice settings. Next to him is Chris Glosser. Glosser, right? Okay, we'll make sure I get it right. Who founded the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Coalition at the Yale Divinity School, where he received his MDiv in 1977. For the next 10 years, he was the founding director of the Lazarus Project, a reconciling ministry between the LGBT community and the church funded by the Presbyterian Church USA. And he continues to do such work. And last but not least is Reverend Megan Rohr, who is the pastor of Grace Evangelical Lutheran Church in San Francisco, and was the first to openly identify as transgender in the candidacy process. Reverend Rohr leads several community food and garden projects to address urban hunger. Welcome. So this question about what did it take to roll away the stone? Please.
So I am Judith Ray, happily affiliated these days with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I probably need to say that first. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. I prayed that prayer every week in my little country EUB church in rural Indiana growing up. I believed in a God who answered that prayer. So when, as a teenager, I watched all of my female classmates get all giddy about boys, and I couldn't figure out what that was all about because I wasn't feeling that at all, I just thought God had answered my prayer. It was only in 1969, early 1969, that a woman kissed me, and everything changed. I experienced arousal, excitement, and panic. How can this be? What I thought was my God-given asexuality came to a crashing halt. Prayer and spiritual wrestling became intense. My partner at that time, Marty, and I drove from Indianapolis, Indiana to Gulfport, Mississippi in one swell swoop, in one day, nonstop, to find the only minister we trusted who we could trust with our questions about our sexuality and our spirituality. He didn't know we were coming. We didn't know how to find him after we got there, but we went anyway. We did find him, and he listened to our angst and sent us off with a healing formula. He said, if this attraction is not of God, it will fade away, and you won't have to worry about it. But if, however, the attraction and the love is truly of God, it will persist, and you'll know it's okay. Well, you can decide what you think about that theology, but we drove back to Indianapolis in peace because we believed that the future, our love and our future was in God's hands. And one stone rolled away. So I was out as Christian and lesbian, active in my United Methodist Church and in other church-related movements, and that euphoria lasted for about 3 weeks. Until I was asked to leave as leader of the youth group, until I was asked to no longer come over and babysit my friends' kids, until the lay witness team of which I was a member banned me from any more missions, and until my spiritual mentor sexually assaulted me, trying to prove that I really was heterosexual. How could this be? My newly claimed sexuality was under assault, and all my spiritual support systems had been pulled out from underneath me. So, being sent away by the church, abandoned by friends, I found myself in spiritual crisis. Until I realized, Deborah, that the gifts of the Spirit hadn't gone away. That prayer still was effectual. That my healing ministry hadn't diminished. That the gifts of the Spirit were still active. I had not been sent away by God. I had not been abandoned by Holy Spirit. The gospel of Jesus Christ was just as true then for me as it had been before, except more so now. And I say more so because perhaps for the first time in my life, I understood grace. When everyone around me had rejected me, when condemnation was the only word the church could find for me, when I'd lost all hope that I could ever merit any acceptance of any kind, God's grace became real for me. And I knew I was loved by God. I knew I was free to love whomever, to be sexual. And one huge stone got rolled away. I knew Grace, and she is a woman. She's a woman at the center of my life and ministry. In my experience, the stone that inhibits resurrection, that stands in the way of liberation and integration, is not singular. Do you hear me? Yep. Coming out to my parents was one stone to be rolled away. And that's a story for another time. In late 1969 in rural Indiana, Marty and I found a United Methodist pastor who would perform a wedding ceremony for us. One more stone rolled away. In 1973, the end of that sacred relationship precipitated another spiritual sexual crisis. And I married a man. Eventually had 2 children, spent 12 years struggling with what it meant to be a bisexual. Another stone to be rolled away. And in the midst of that struggle, another crisis as I chafed at and rejected churches and society's expectation of monogamy. Oops. Oh my, another stone to be rolled away. Just about the time that I was ready to celebrate liberation and integration, new challenges came in intimate relationships with 2 women of color, not serially. My white privilege was challenged. Another stone. And later in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, I faced institutional and church academic stones that were difficult. I've still not been able to roll them all away. I've not been able to roll away the stones of job losses and of economic fragility. That's why I'm here. Because experience and enlightened self-interest have taught me that the fullness of resurrection and the fullness of integration comes only within community. Thank you for being here, because I am more whole because we are together. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. So, Randa, would you like to share a little bit with us?
Can we talk about movement strategy instead? No, I'm teasing. I just want to begin by acknowledging a fairly remarkable thing, that there are people in this room from every decade of the 4 decades that I have been an activist, from activist on the street to academic to student to funder, people from all over, and that is fairly remarkable to me. And that's kind of a mirror allowing me to look back. I think what most people, I think only a few people know about me, is that I'm the adult child of a schizophrenic. My mom lived with schizophrenia all her life. She's still living with schizophrenia. And that caused, that combined with homophobia and racism in my younger life, combined to silence my voice. If you've read Maya Angelou's work, you know that at a certain point when she encountered trauma in her own life, she had a kind of mutism that came in. Now, I could speak, but I wouldn't speak for about 5 or 6 years of my life. And so the stones that I needed to roll away were, now as an adult I understand, were naming myself and finding my voice. The way that that silence surrounded me and the way that I experienced that silence was that even though I believe I had a remarkable college and seminary education, by the time I got to seminary, I felt like I was living in a plastic box or a glass box where I couldn't touch other people and they couldn't touch me, and I couldn't empathize. And so I also felt like there was a struggle happening out there in the world, and that I, safely in seminary, was in the wrong place, even though in many, many ways seminary was really great for me. So one Christmas, because at that point I wasn't as good a planner as I am now, and I was a little more broke than I am now, I took the longest bus ride in the world, back when Greyhound was the thing, from Atlanta to Denver, Colorado, to visit my parents for Christmas. And on that journey, I took My Soul Looks Back, which is James Cone's autobiography. And that was remarkable in itself because early in my seminary career, I had met James Cone. And let me just say, James Cone then was not like James Cone is now. So I met James Cone when I was in seminary, and it became very clear within a few minutes that he didn't like me, and I didn't like him. And I don't know what that was about. We don't have time to get into black men stuff, but we just did not like each other. And James Cone at that point was very, very hot. He was, I met him while he was speaking at the Council of Negro Churchmen. That's how long ago this was. A group of prominent black pastors and theologians trying to speak to the needs of the day. And again, I met with him privately. He didn't like me. I didn't like him. So it was remarkable. I don't know how I found myself on this 30-hour bus ride reading My Soul Looks Back. But somewhere in the middle of that journey, I came to this passage that began my journey of finding a voice and naming myself. And the passage was, when your theology begins to speak about life and death, when theology speaks about the things that matter, then doing theology comes easily and naturally. And what that said to me was that I had to begin to do theology and think very deeply and personally about my own circumstances as a gay black man. And that if I was going to do this work, I had to do it understanding my own blackness and my own queerness. And from that point on, with the help of a lot of folks in the room, I began to find my name and find my voice and speak about things that mattered. And so I'm deeply grateful to James Cone, who is not now what he was then, nor am I. Thank you.
This is rich, isn't it?
Wow, yes, it is. Is this on? Okay. Yes, the thing about this is with each story that is being told, my own is changing. So I'm actually putting away my notes. I'm just going to talk for 5 or 6 minutes. In the beginning is the relation. Martin Buber. Someone earlier today, Deb Peavy, I think it was, asked me about my own doctoral dissertation, which was about mutual relation and sort of where that came from. And I've realized in listening to my 3 colleagues speak so far that I guess I've known this, but I really realize it sitting here, how early it began, how early in my life that sense of mutual relation, of radical relationality as sacred, as God, really began. And so the integration of everything in my life, including my sexuality and my spirituality, began when I was a very small child. Living in the mountains of Western North Carolina, an only child for 6 years, cultivating a relationship with nature, with creatures, with a black snake, whom I very creatively call Blackie. And who would really just come around. And I had I was a very imaginative kid. And I had an imaginary playmate, a little black girl named Sophie Couch. In a very racist society, the word racism we didn't know, but the word colored I knew. And I knew there was something the matter with the way white people and colored people seemed to have to live. Not in the same place, in separate places, in different kinds of worlds, and I was troubled by that. So Sophie Couch and I developed a relationship. My mother would set a place at the table for Sophie Couch. And Sophie Couch would pray, would have family prayer with my family. My family, my parents, were fairly moderate to conservative, Christian, white Southerners, but they were extremely supportive and open-minded about their children and wanting us to be able to think for ourselves and grow into whoever we would grow into. Now, I don't think it occurred to them where this might lead me, their oldest child, and many years later we had that conversation. When I came out when I was in my mid-30s. But in any case, it all began very early for me, this intuition that God is our power in relation, and that God gives us the capacity to build mutuality with the creation, with other humans, including across white and colored lines. If I didn't know how to do it, but I knew it needed to happen. By the time I was 4 or 5 years old, and I was asking why it couldn't happen, and nobody had an answer for that. But I knew it wasn't God's will. I knew that racism was not God's will. I also believe that I was very polymorphously perverse when it comes to my sexuality. I believe that I was having erotic connections with the earth, with the creatures, with the mountains, with the water. That sexuality was a very holistic dimension of who I was, just as spirituality was, and perhaps even the same thing. Perhaps even the same thing, sexuality and spirituality for a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. Anyhow, we'll jump forward. As I grew up, the stone, the big stone that recurs, that it's never fully rolled away, is fear. Fear. Again and again and again, I have to work on rolling it away, and always in relation to others with me. Together we have to push this stone, push it, and then often it will roll back. Jimmy Creech this morning or yesterday or at some point mentioned that I have affirmed rage. Well, I suppose I have. Rage against racism, rage against homophobia, rage against sexism, rage against the structures of injustice. My former partner and beloved Beverly Harrison wrote a piece called The Power of Anger and the Work of Love, in which anger, rage, is a resource in fighting for justice. Let me draw toward an end of this presentation with an image that I want to leave you with, and this comes out of my work in therapeutic horseback riding in my retirement. The image of the horse as my priest, as a spiritual teacher. A horse is a fear-based animal because a horse is an animal of prey. And when something surprises a horse or threatens a horse, the horse has 2 instincts. One is to fight, and by fighting, it's to trample, it's to tear up, it's to beat down, it's to kill. Not very creative. The other is to flee, deny, be secret, be closeted, don't get involved, apathy, whatever. I think we have similar choices as humans. The third choice, which I believe is the creative choice, and I'd like to believe that it's a life journey for me and for all of us, is to have the courage to walk on in relation to the rider, in relation to the herd, if you will, to walk on, trusting, building a mutual trust, one step in front of the other, using resources in our lives, helping each other find the resources we need, but walking on purposefully toward our goal, whether the goal is to come out, whether the goal is a particular job, whether the goal requires a great deal of courage. I believe that's it, and I believe my time is up.
Thank you, Carter. So, Chris, we're going to turn to you now.
Here we go. I don't want to hold it. I'm glad somebody knows how to do this. Thank you. To say something about my own story, I want to start with the story from which this metaphor, rolling the stone away, comes from the conference and for this particular conversation. A story particularly dear to my heart, because in 1976, I was approaching my final year of seminary, and my second year and final year as the openly gay member of the task force to study homosexuality and ordination in the Presbyterian Church. And I was asked by West Hollywood Presbyterian Church, a small little congregation, which is now West Hollywood United Church of Christ. It had a transformation, a conversion experience, to write a proposal. That's the pastor back there. Boy, is he relieved. To write a proposal for a ministry of reconciliation. Thank you again. A ministry of reconciliation between the church and the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. And because it was going to come up for a vote every year, They wanted to have some other name that didn't have LGBT in it, or queer, or gay, or anything like that. So I was thinking of two images of resurrection, and one was the butterfly, you know, coming out of the cocoon, and the other was the raising of Lazarus. And I decided that a ministry within the gay community called the Butterfly Project might sound a little flighty. So I went with Lazarus because that's a good biblical story. But it's a wonderful story, more than meets the eye, because it's not just a Jesus story. It's a story about community and neighborhood and how important it is for everyone to be involved in resurrection, in rolling the stones from the tombs, in unbinding the death clause and letting people go. And that's what I have found throughout my life, is that there have been people, neighbors, neighborhoods, churches, people of faith, friends, who have rolled away several stones for me so I could begin to own my sexuality. The first was in high school when my stone of conservative political views was rolled away. And then in college, when my biblical literalism and my fundamentalism were rolled away by my involvement in the religious studies department of my college and at a Presbyterian church in Van Nuys, California. And that really led me then into a place where I could begin thinking that my sexuality and spirituality could greet one another and be friends. But when I think about what stone I had to roll away, what interesting way of putting this, the theme for tonight, because I really thought, well, wait, you know, it really requires the whole community, and it does take a village. But when I thought of it personally, I realized that for me, it's getting over myself. That is the stone I continue to roll away. Anybody who reads my blog knows this. But this is something that I continue to work on because I am really an introvert. I know I play extrovert in circumstances like this, but I'm really an introvert. And so I had to get over myself. And part of that introversion, I think, came from this best little boy in the world. Everything had to come out perfect. And I found myself exchanging the goal of perfection for the goal of integrity. And that was what enabled me to bring together, or allow God, the Spirit, to bring together my sexuality and spirituality. Troy Perry was the first openly gay speaker at Yale Divinity School, and I arranged the visit. And I remember how traumatic that was for me. The night before he came, I felt like I was experiencing birth pains. I was literally in pain. Because this was the most out thing I had done as an activist on the seminary campus. And so Troy came and did a delightful presentation. You know how he is. Charismatic, fun, makes it easy for people to understand our experience. And the only faculty member that I recall being in attendance was Henry Nouwen. And afterwards, I asked him, well, what did he think of Troy's presentation? And he said, well, he didn't want to be critical. He really liked it. He liked it very much. And finally, pressing him, he said, well, I kept wondering what was his spirituality that undergirded his ability to challenge the church in terms of homosexuality. What was his spiritual foundation for doing so? And so I realized in that moment that my spirituality had to come out of the closet along with my sexuality. And that has really helped me connect to LGBT people and the broader community and other peoples of faith and faith communities to realize that it's our spirituality that we can draw on one another's spirituality. And sexuality can be a means of spiritual expression, I believe. And so I was able to bring that together through the help of a process, and in a process that continues. Do I have time for one more story? Am I 1 minute? 2 minutes?
You're actually up.
Oh, I'm up. Okay. Well,
We should have enough time to come back around.
yeah, maybe we can come back to that story. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Imani?
Yes. Am I on? Yes. So when I was asked to do this, I'm trying to figure out which stone am I going to name. I've got a whole boulder, a whole mountain full of stones. How do we begin to talk about this? I grew up, I was 3 pounds, 3 ounces. And so I was always told that I was a miracle, that God made me and I was a miracle. So that was and I'm the oldest kid. And so that, I was a star. I was a miracle and God made me. So there was nothing that could undo that, I thought. And so we grew up Baptist. I grew up Baptist until I was about 7 years old, and then my parents converted to Pentecostal, fundamental Pentecostal, no red, no lipstick, no dancing, no friends, church Sunday through Sunday, blah, blah, blah. Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? My mom died when I was 10. And so I was kind of mad at God. This God who made me a miracle, how could he take my mother? I don't know how that happened. And then I was abused by someone who was supposed to be caring for me sexually. My father turned into this awful person, and he was abusive to all his children. He had 5 children. And, but I still was special because I was made by God, even though I was mad at God. And I carried that madness, angry, tried to be agnostic because God did not come and help me through all these things. And I married, did it twice before I got it right. Married a man, did that twice before I got it right. And right for me. And divorced both of them and found this woman, or she found me, I can't remember now, it's been a while. And she had a relationship with God. But her God, she would say stuff, and I shared this with some people here, she would say stuff like, God, what the f? Now, that wasn't the God I knew, right? I mean, we're talking about fire and brimstone, gets struck by lightning, and she would say this regularly, God, what the f? God, help me with this. God, and I'm looking at her wondering, what? You know you're going to go to hell. And she says, well, my God knows me, inside and out, knows me. And that was a powerful and profound kind of thing. And guess what? She went to MCC, DC. So she 13-stepped me to MCC, DC. And I stayed there. But just prior to meeting her, though, I saw Candace Schultes at a funeral. I had never seen a lesbian minister. What the? So there was Candace doing this eulogy. I said, okay. And then I met this woman and said, okay. But so I had a deep hatred for my father. That was a stone, right? And I could not believe, I could not forgive him. So that was a big stone. Then I had this real madness toward God. So those are 2 big stones. So I'm in an airport going about business, going about my job, and I'm in the air. And we're flying, and it's really turbulent. And the pilot, the stewardess says, tells us again, reiterates about putting your mask on first. So if they do that another time, we know it's serious, right? And people are getting really scared. I'm nervous too. I'm looking out the window, the plane is shaking, saying, oh God, calling God now, right? Oh God. And as we're flying, the plane goes up and up and up and up. And there is the sun shining. The S-U-N is shining. And the turbulence and mishmash and junk is underneath. The epiphany was the sun, the S-U-N, is always shining, and the S-O-N is always shining. When I got off that plane, I made arrangements to go see my pop. It was not me who rolled that stone away. That stone was rolled away. And I became a member of MCCDC. And I don't say I'm a Christian, because that has a little stuff for me. But I do aim to be Christ-like and act like Christ acts. I still have a lot of stones, y'all, but those two have been rolled away.
Thank you, Imani. Yeah, I'm humbled to be here and the authenticity with which we're speaking. So, Megan.
I was born in South Dakota, where the technology is very up to date. And when I was in my mother's womb, they decided that I was a boy because of the rate of my heartbeat. I don't know if it meant it was fast or slow. I don't think they knew either. My alcoholic father, when he tells the story of my birth, will say that the first words that were spoken when someone looked between my legs were oops, which is all too familiar for how we treat female bodies in this world. But I believed that everybody felt that way. In fact, I had so many after-school specials that told me so. Sure, Cosmo magazine had voluptuous naked people on it, but everyone needed 12 tips to fix their thighs or their abs. And what I learned from the moral of these after-school specials was that your job in puberty was to figure out how to look in the mirror and not puke on yourself, or how to just live until life got better. But that everybody had body dysmorphia, or some other dumb word invented later. And so as I grew up, I felt about my body like I continue to feel about the cross. It's not what I would have chosen, but I'm grateful. And then, like other people born in South Dakota during the time when we didn't label on the milk whether or not there were hormones in it, all the female-bodied folk in my high school needed breast reduction surgery. And so my boulders to move were literally in my over-the-shoulder boulder holders. That's a bra, guys. And I had been a part of a queer Lutheran movement that borrowed our authority from the future. We got ordained before anyone gave us permission, and I lived to see that day in the future when the church declared that we were in fact pastors. But a month after my call to the current congregation I serve, I had planned for a year a double mastectomy. I had avoided it for 10 years because you get two choices when you go to the plastic surgeon for this kind of conversation, Ken or Barbie. And those seem like dumb choices. They didn't have like a voluptuous Gilgamesh warrior woman saggy option. They literally only had 12 inches from your clavicle. Your nipples will be perky because this is my art. Shut up and stop asking those questions. And so I waited because I was comfortable with my body when I hadn't made the choice, but making a choice in one direction or the other felt stupid and dumb and performative. And how do you do that when everyone's watching you? When there hadn't been a Sunday I had ever preached where someone had not commented on my hair or my earrings or my outfit, or touched my body thinking it was funny, because I didn't relate to those breasts anyway, so who cares? And I had made a rule when I became a pastor that if people misgendered me, I would not correct them because my private parts are my private parts. And so it had been printed in the paper both directions, both that I was born with a penis and that I was born with a vagina, and I never corrected any of them because it kind of was funny. And my congregation accepted me. In fact, I got 7 copies of the Time magazine with Laverne Cox on the cover on the same day. But as they wheeled me in for my surgery, I didn't know if I would be on trial afterwards. The Lutheran Church had never done this before, and the papers were rife with stories of people who, yeah, they transitioned, but you had to end one call and find another one after that messy puberty time. And I had written this long blog article about how people shouldn't ask me questions, though it would be obvious what my surgery was, and my lament that because I was good at social media, I knew that year 6 people had typed in the words, "Pastor Megan naked photos," looking for information on me. A year later, I would learn that that was my call committee. They saw an article in Butch Wonders, and someone with a similar haircut as me, who looked nothing like me, was in a photo with boxers and shorts, and they assumed I had taken naked photos and almost didn't call me as their pastor. When I came out, I was unbound, grateful that I didn't have to wear bras anymore, but as I eased back into the world, one of my first outings with other pastors at an LGBT fundraiser, worried I'd be hugged so hard my nipples might fall off, across the room, a pastor yells, "Love your new tits, Pastor!" And then I got in a car accident where I had to explain to the ambulance people how to take off my clergy collar and check if my chest was open and bleeding. And I needed a ride. And my church council president came, and when they went to put on the EKG, she said, "I'll give you some privacy, I'll leave the room." And they pulled the curtain, and there she was, peeking through the slits. So I invited her back in. You can unbind, but if your wrappings are like Lazarus, those death wrappings leave you naked when you take them off. And the most important gift Jesus gave Lazarus was to say, "Let him go," before anyone could try to poke him like they would do to him later.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you. I want to thank everybody in my panel. Chris, did you want to tell that? Are we off top?
I have to tell the story, but I can.
Well, you know, I promised if we had a moment, so go for it.
So long as everybody tells a story. Well, it's another Henry Nouwen story. Actually, I was visiting him in Toronto when I went to an AIDS consultation there. And I was telling him about the people living with HIV and AIDS who were there telling their stories. And it was a church-based consultation. And I was so impressed with that. Now, I had already come out in the big way in the Presbyterian Church and was known for my sexuality and all that stuff. But I said to Henry, I said, you know, if I were if I tested positive for HIV or developed AIDS, I don't think I would share that with the church. I feel like they've already gotten so much of me talking about my sexuality that I admired the people who were able to do that, but I didn't think I could. And he said he understood that perfectly, but he said he really believed that the Christian offered his, her, their life for others. And that's what we were to do, was to share our stories, as several speakers have mentioned, is that we offer our lives to others. And that's how we all grow.
Thank you. Great, thank you. So I want to do a little time check here, because I wasn't sure if we had an hour, so it's time to cut. Okay. So as we wrap up here, is there one little thought, I mean, just like a couple of words that you would like to share with people, if you could give them like one bit of advice, so to speak, as they're facing through life and rolling their stone away? Just one little quick snippet piece of advice. So I would say, to thine own self be true. Yeah. Do you want to think about it in this minute? Okay.
I was once at a rally in Boston, and a very wise Quaker woman said that when you're feeling powerless or confused or depressed, she had two pieces of advice. Do something and do it together.
Great.
Do something and do it together.
Thank you. Piece of advice? Randall?
Wow, my thing has gotten short. There we go. All right. You know what? I wish we had more time, because I think particularly for people of color, there's a lot packed into finding our names and finding our voices. But I would really quickly say, in my own life, I imagine that internalized homophobia and internalized oppression on the basis of race are kinds of poisons that we sip all our lives, and that we have to be engaged in the process, and this is not pretty, but it's how I feel, of purging ourselves of these poisons that have accumulated in our system. And only when we begin to purge the internalized racism and internalized homophobia and internalized challenges around gender identity do we begin to really live. I guess that's the thought I would leave.
Great, thank you. Do you have a little phrase of advice?
There's not a week that goes by that someone doesn't contact me on social networking to tell me that they're either considering taking their own life, or if they didn't find someone like me, they would have taken their own life. This is beyond silence equals death, and to the point where our faith must be louder than the liars who tell people that God can't love them for exactly who they are, who get more airtime.
Amen. Great, thank you. Chris?
I just want to say thank you for being my neighbors.
Grace is real. Don't be afraid to love one another.
There's a war going on. There's a war against women. There's a war against black people. And there's a war on black women in particular. Silence when you know someone is being attacked equals their death. So we have to stand up.
Great. Have a little round of applause for this brave panel. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. And for all the brave work that you do, you inspire me.
Thank you